The Man Who Found His Voice. Part 1. The Quiet One. For most of his life, Daniel Blake lived in the shadows of other people's voices. In meetings at the marketing firm where he worked, Daniel was the quiet one. He typed diligently, smiled politely, and let others take credit for ideas he had whispered in passing. At family dinners, he sat between his brother Tom, the charming doctor, and his sister Eliza, the world-traveling photographer, quietly refilling water glasses as their stories filled the air. It wasn't that Daniel lacked thoughts or dreams. His mind was a galaxy of ideas, filled with unwritten books, business plans, and speeches he rehearsed in the mirror but never said out loud. He had opinions about the company's stale campaigns. He had visions for community projects. He had a voice. But for some reason, he never used it. Maybe it was his childhood. Being the middle child of 3, Daniel had learned early to avoid attention. He was neither the firstborn success nor the adorable youngest. He became invisible by choice, blending into the background like wallpaper. "You're such a good listener, Dan," people would say, and he'd nod with a soft smile, never realizing they meant it as a compliment for silence. The tipping point came one Friday evening. Daniel stayed late at the office to prepare the next week's pitch, an idea he had developed over weeks in silence. His manager, Mark, passed by, glanced at the presentation on Daniel's screen, and said, "This is brilliant. I'll present it Monday." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded. Mark walked away with the deck under his arm. That night, Daniel sat in his car in the parking garage for over an hour. The city hummed outside, lights flickered on tall buildings, but inside the silence pressed on his chest like a weight. It wasn't anger that he felt. It was grief, for all the things he never said, all the times he gave pieces of himself away without asking for credit. And that's when he knew he needed to change. Part 2. The First Step. The Monday after that painful Friday, Daniel walked into work with a smile that felt like a lie. He greeted the receptionist, nodded at Mark as they crossed paths in the hallway, and sat at his desk as if nothing had happened. The marketing pitch, the one he had crafted for weeks, was now being praised across the department, attributed to Mark's vision. Colleagues congratulated him on the win. Mark beamed. No one mentioned Daniel. And Daniel said nothing. But something inside had shifted. That weekend in the parking garage had cracked something open. Not just a moment of frustration, but a quiet rebellion against the silence he'd lived in for years. That evening, instead of going home, Daniel drove to the community center 2 blocks from his apartment. He had driven past it every day for years, but never once stepped inside. A sign outside read, "Public Speaking for Beginners, Mondays, 6:30 p.m. All voices welcome." He parked, turned the ignition off, sat in silence. His hands trembled as he reached for the door handle. The old voice returned, "You don't belong here. You're not interesting. You'll embarrass yourself." But he opened the door anyway. The room smelled like carpet cleaner and coffee. Metal chairs were arranged in a circle. A woman in her 60s, with curly silver hair and warm eyes, smiled at him. And it mattered.
"Hi there. I'm Clara,"
she said.
"First time?"
Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I'm Daniel." She motioned to a chair.
"Welcome. You're in the right place."
As people trickled in, Daniel noticed they were all normal. A teacher, a delivery driver, a grandmother. No aspiring politicians or celebrity speakers, just people like him, afraid of being heard and tired of hiding. Clara started the session with a simple prompt.
"Say your name and one thing you're passionate about."
When it was his turn, Daniel's heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He stood. "I'm Daniel," he said, voice thin. I like writing, I guess." A beat of silence. Then applause. That was it. No critique. No laughter. Just gentle clapping and nods. Daniel sat down, breathless. That night, walking to his car, he felt something new. It wasn't pride exactly, but relief. Relief that he had survived. It was the first step. Part 3. Building muscles you can't see. Public speaking class became Daniel's ritual. Every Monday, no matter how drained or anxious he felt, he showed up. At first, he spoke only when asked. Then he began volunteering. Sometimes he bombed. His voice cracked, or he forgot his train of thought. But Clara always said,
It's not about perfect. It's about progress.
One night, after giving a 2-minute talk about his favorite childhood movie, a man named Ravi clapped Daniel on the back. "You're getting better, man. Like, way better." Daniel smiled, surprised at how much that meant to him. At work, he started noticing things. In meetings, he no longer avoided eye contact. He began contributing, not just nodding in agreement, but offering real ideas. When someone else tried to take credit, he gently but clearly asserted his role. It wasn't easy. His voice sometimes trembled. His hands still sweated. But he was speaking up. He also reached out to Molly, the new intern who always seemed too shy to speak. Over lunch one day, he asked about her ideas on a stalled campaign. She lit up, sharing a brilliant concept no one had asked her for. The next meeting, Daniel gave her the floor. She spoke nervously, but her idea won the team over. Afterward, she thanked him.
No one's ever listened like that before.
Daniel nodded. "I used to wait for people to listen. Now I try to make space." Outside of work, he started journaling again. Words flowed. Not always coherent, but raw and real. Some nights, he read entries aloud just to hear them in his own voice. It felt like building muscles you couldn't see. And slowly, he began to stand taller, not out of pride, but presence. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not even to himself. Part 4. The Invisible Man. 6 months after his first class, Clara announced a community showcase.
Each of you will give a 5-minute speech.
She said.
Topic of your choice. Friends and family welcome.
Daniel felt like bolting. 5 minutes? In front of strangers? He pulled Clara aside after class. "I don't think I can do it." Clara smiled.
Of course you don't. But you will.
He stared at her.
You think people are brave because they don't feel fear.
She said gently.
But they're brave because they feel it, and go anyway.
That night, Daniel stared at a blank page for hours. What did he have to say? He thought about his life. The quiet meetings, the stolen ideas, the moments he held his tongue while others spoke lies. He remembered the boy who used to practice speeches in the bathroom mirror, the man who sat in a parking garage, grieving his own silence. And he began to write. He titled it, The Invisible Man. For the next few weeks, he practiced every night. He recorded himself and cringed at his own voice. He stumbled, started over, rewrote, practiced again. The night of the showcase, the room was filled with folding chairs and kind strangers. Daniel's hands were ice. When Clara introduced him, he nearly dropped his cue cards. He walked to the front, looked out at the room. His voice shook, but he spoke. "I used to believe my silence was kindness," he began. "That listening made me useful. That speaking up was prideful or selfish." He told them about the workplace silence, the family dinners, the nights rehearsing words that never came out. "But silence isn't always peace," he said. "Sometimes it's a prison." When he finished, there was a moment of stillness. Then, applause. Real, full-bodied, echoing applause. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A man stood to clap harder. Daniel sat back down, heart pounding, but alive. He had been heard. And it changed everything. Part 5. Becoming the Voice. A year passed. Daniel no longer sat in meetings like wallpaper. He now led them. He had been promoted twice. Not because he was louder, but because he brought out the voices of others. He created space, gave credit, challenged ideas with grace. He hadn't become someone else. He had become more himself. He kept attending Clara's class, not as a student, but as a mentor. He helped newcomers find their footing, just like Clara had helped him. One afternoon, Molly, now a full-time staff member, invited Daniel to speak at her university's Young Leaders event.
They want someone who knows about growth.
She said.
And no one's taught me more than you.
Daniel hesitated. He wasn't a TED speaker. He wasn't famous. But he said yes. The event was held in a large auditorium. Hundreds of students, notebooks open, ready to be inspired. Daniel stepped onto the stage. And he told the truth. About fear. About invisibility. About learning that his voice mattered, not because it was perfect, but because it was his. Afterward, a student approached him in tears.
I've always been the quiet one,
she said.
You made me feel like maybe I don't have to be forever.
Daniel smiled. That's what someone once made me feel too. A few months later, Daniel hosted his own event, a small local series called Bound Voices. Anyone could speak. Young or old. Loud or shy. Experienced or terrified. Each week, Daniel introduced the speakers with care. He sat in the front row, listening like it was sacred. And every now and then, he spoke too. Not to impress, but to remind others, and himself, that the quietest people often have the deepest things to say. He was no longer afraid of his own voice, because he had spent the time to find it.